In this video, we're going to compromise an Azure website, gain access to an access token for a managed identity for the web app, and then run code on that virtual machine as system and extract credentials from the VM. Let's dive in. So here I am on my Windows 10 computer, and I'm going to open up my web browser, Google Chrome, where I have this page open for devcorpcareers.azurewebsites.net. This is an Azure website, and interestingly enough, it has a vulnerability. Now, for the sake of demonstrating a lot of these Azure Active Directory attacks, I'm not going to focus a whole lot on the vulnerability for this web app, but note, hey, it asks us to send us your resume, where you can enter your name, an email address, and then only some docx files or PDF files that you could upload. Granted, it actually will accept more than just those. In fact, if I actually hit F12 on my keyboard and open up the network tab, I could go ahead and refresh this page, and note the response from this website actually clues me in this is running PHP. We can see that X powered by server header, PHP 7.4.33, and with that, we know, okay, we're up against a PHP powered website. So, potentially, we could upload files that are a PHP web shell and gain code execution easily on this web app. So let's test out that idea. I'll go ahead and minimize this. I'll open up Notepad, and then I'll try to create a little web shell in PHP. Let me just add my PHP tags with the arrow, question mark, PHP, and I'll denote a system function that I want to call here, and I'll pass in the parameter or argument that's really a variable that I can control via the URL parameters and get HTTP variables. With that, we could basically just have simple code execution all in our address bar. Let me go ahead and save this. I'll just put it on the desktop. I'll toggle this to all files, and let's just say myshell.php. Let me go ahead and save this file. With that, we can minimize Notepad, get back to our web app, and my full name is just the letter A. My email is just a@a.com, of course, and now let's choose a file to upload. Navigating to my desktop, I see myshell.php, so let's open that up and send it, and fingers crossed, ooh, upload failed, allowed file types are docx and PDF. Okay, well, hey, let's try another file extension. Maybe PHP is on a deny list. There's a thought that it's using that docx and .pdf as an allow list, but we can test that theory just by naming this maybe something else, like a .phtml, one of those more obscure file extensions for running PHP code. Let's save this and try that. A@a.com, fill this out one more time, and now let's apply myshell.phtml. Let's send this, and file is uploaded successfully. Excellent. Now up in the URL in the address bar, we could just do a little bit of digging and see, okay, it's likely in /uploads. If I try to go to that location, it is a forbidden folder, in which case, okay, I probably can't do directory listing, but I know that myshell.phtml is uploaded there. In fact, we can go visit it, and it's not going to give me any output right now because we haven't provided a C parameter, or the variable that will include, but if I were to add a question mark to denote that, you can see I have, hey, some of my history saved here, C equals who am I, and that will tell me I am data, the web application user running the service. And this is code execution. I could run whatever I wanted to, like hostname. How about that? Okay, totally randomly created virtual machine, good by me. But let's think about this, because if this is an Azure website hosted in the cloud, with Azure being the cloud hosting provider, much like AWS, Amazon Web Services, or GCP, the Google Cloud Platform, there are very likely some sensitive secrets, or at the very least sensitive info in the environment variables. So let's see what environment variables exist by simply using the command env and using that as our C parameter passed in. Let me go ahead and hit enter on this, and there is a lot of nonsense here. I'll hit Control U on my keyboard, or just right click to view the page source, and that will at least give me a little bit more, hey, line breaks, and it's not all just one long word-wrapped text dump in this case. Now, let's look for some of the more interesting identity-based environment variables, stuff that's pertinent to Azure websites, and a lot of that cloud-hosted infrastructure. Here's one interesting one, the identity header, which looks like a GUID, a lot of that hex value there. And if I scroll down a little bit more, we might be able to go track down potentially another identity-based environment variable, in this case, the identity endpoint. And that is at HTTP 169.254.129.2.8081 as a port /MSI token. Now that gives us some juicy information, and we might be able to gain further access into this Azure hosted environment. It is cloud infrastructure after all, so we could very well just access resources that are available online on the public internet. So we could use commands like curl or wget, or just ask the internet, hey, can you get me a little bit more detail on management capabilities for these Azure environments? And using the identity header and the identity endpoint, we could actually grab the access token for the managed identity running this service. So let's hop back over to our Notepad instance here. And we were running these commands, but now we might be able to use more of a special command. Just as I was alluding to, perhaps using curl, and let's try to go access that identity endpoint that we saw returned from the environment variables. And I want to now include another HTTP parameter like a resource as to what I want to actually go access. Now, this is pretty cool. We could literally go access the management.azure.com resource and potentially get some juicy details. And we could actually supply that identity header value and grab the access token. Now, whenever you go access resources like this, management.azure.com, you do have to supply an API version. So we'll include that with an ampersand to denote another variable will include API-version. We'll set that equal to, and forgive me, I realize this is like boilerplate. I tend to just sort of copy and paste. If you're willing to press the I believe button, that API version, okay, copied a little bit too much there, is 2017, September 1st or 0901. And with that, we'll also supply another header. We'll add that with a TAC-H argument, but it might be best to actually set the endpoint that we want, the identity endpoint and the resource, all in its own set of double quotes, so that's interpreted properly as a string, but the header that we'll include with TAC-H can be our secret, and with that, we'll include our identity header filled out there. Fingers crossed that will return some juicy information for us, but that is the full command. If I turn word wrap on, is that a thing? Yeah, okay, thank you, Notepad. We're simply running the command to use curl internally on that Azure hosted website to go reach the management endpoints for Azure as a cloud service with the identity header and the all internal environment variables that we just pulled. Let me save this as another file. We'll call this like getToken.phtml, as we know that was the extension that worked well for us. So let me save this. We'll get back to our web browser and let me go just back to the home page so I can upload yet another file. Now I know you might be saying, hey, that's just a command. You totally could have done that from your web shell itself. And you're totally right. I just kind of wanted to add it in another .phtml file so we wouldn't get in the way of any strings or double quotes or any of that nonsense. If anything, I think it's okay to do this, and we'll go ahead and upload yet another file to extract the token. So we'll get back over to our uploads directory with view source set, so we should be able to access our getToken.phtml, and that should give us some sweet details here. Take a look. Look at this access token and the EYJ0 that denotes this is a JWT, or one of those JSON web tokens. Now I can copy and paste this whole thing, but it even gives us a little bit more insight. Hey, what the client ID might be, the token type being bearer, so you can include that as basic authentication in other HTTP headers. Of course, the resource that it came from, the Azure management, timestamp, expiration stuff, but ultimately I just want this access token. Bear in mind, you can go slap this into jwt.io, and in fact, let's do that. Let's go see, hey, what is this actual token made up of? If I scroll down here, I can go ahead and paste in just this big JWT and take a look. On the right-hand side, all the decoded details about management.azure, all of the timestamps associated with it, and some app ID information, the OID, all that sweet stuff. This is going to come in super duper handy when we might now connect to that Azure account, log in with this managed identity, and then see what damage we could do. In fact, let's go do it. Let me minimize out of this web browser here, and I'll go ahead and open up PowerShell. Now, in this environment, I do have AZ PowerShell already set up up and configured. Just in case you aren't familiar, AZ PowerShell or Azure PowerShell is the library and module and PowerShell package you could install, set up, and get to use different PowerShell commandlets to easily access, develop, deploy, administer, and manage a whole lot of Microsoft Azure resources. It is installed by default in the Azure Cloud Shell, but if you wanted to interact with it locally, just like we're doing, hey, you could simply install that module and then go ahead and import it as you need it. But the usage here is really awesome because we could super duper simply just connect to that Azure account with all the access tokens and credentials that we've gotten thus far. Let me show you. You know, we have our token, right? So maybe it's worthwhile defining that as a variable. I'll wrap that in double quotes here. And now I'll try to use that command, connect AZ account, and I'll specify the token, and then we'll also include an account ID. Now this account ID actually comes from the values that we've already received. You can see it inside of the JWT decoded data, the app ID, and even, hey, just actually checking out the response from our curl command. Scrolling to the very, very end, that was that client ID that we saw there, just this GUID 064AAF57, blah, blah, blah. Let's get back to PowerShell and let's just paste this in. Now, before I forget, I realize I do actually need another little PowerShell switch or parameter here where I'll specify this token actually being provided for this access token hyphen dash little parameter there. So now, fingers crossed, we should really be able to connect to this Azure account, and let's see if it comes through. Yeah, okay, excellent. So we have this account all staged and set up for DevCorp, and that's the subscription set and the tenant ID for that alongside all across the Azure cloud environment. Now we could ask, hey, what permissions do we have? What can we do with this token? But unfortunately, some of the other commandlets we could use with AZ PowerShell, like get role assignment, won't actually give us all of the actual, hey, properties, permissions, things that we could do. It'll give us some mappings to different object IDs, but we might need to do a little bit more. We could grab some tokens for like Microsoft Graph, that whole other API, but I think we're okay, just still rolling with the management at Azure API thus far. So we know that we have the subscription name, but ultimately we need the subscription ID to be able to drill down further. In Azure, a whole lot of the organizational sort of architecture of logical objects and things that you can interact and do things with, they're all under the bucket of a subscription. Think of it like a project in GCP or whatever other cloud equivalent you can kind of consider there. We can request a lot of this information, again, with just simple curl commands to that management.azure.com, but we should probably stage this a little bit in some organized way. So let me actually open up PowerShell ISE so we could script this in a quick and easy way. Let me just save a file for us to work in. I'll call it like playground.ps1. It doesn't matter. It's just a scratch pad for us. Let's include our token as that big JWT syntax. We'll paste that in so we have that set. And if we are making more requests, we can define our URL variable, and that can be just a string for HTTPS management.azure, spell that right, .com/subscriptions. In this case is what we're interested in. And we will supply another HTTP parameter, in this case, the API version once again. In this one, we can go a little old school, 2020-0101, I think should work just fine for us. And then we'll define some parameters, because ultimately I want to be able to use the PowerShell commandlet like invoke REST method, and that will basically act like curl or whatever, but it helps stay clean in that PowerShell commandlet and the usual like .NET object pipeline. It'll just be easier to read. But our parameters should be a PowerShell object sort of setup here with a method being our HTTP verb. In this case, we'll just use get. We have our URI, and it's probably confusing. I realize I called that URL in the variable, but let's just, hey, keep that tracking. And finally, we need the headers, in which case I'll supply yet another sort of, hey, PowerShell dictionary, I guess, and that case should really be our authorization header. Our authorization header can equal our bearer with the token included. I think that's good. Now I'll pass this to our invoke REST method with the @ sign, so it sort of unravels that whole object there for us, and we'll wrap that in parentheses and just extract the value out of it. Now fingers crossed, we have everything staged so we could quickly and easily request anything that we might like, in this case, the subscriptions, to hopefully get the ID value. Fingers crossed, came through. Yep, look at that. We can see the ID value provided, and that is subscriptions B4138 38, whatever. There as well, subscription ID, so we're looking good. We have that next piece of intel. And hey, super quick, before we go too far down the rabbit hole, please, if I may, look, the only way that I'm able to get a whole lot of these free educational cybersecurity videos out for you as frequently as I can is thanks to the help of some sponsors. So if I may, please allow me to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Altered Security. Nikhil Mittal and team have dubbed April as the month of Azure security. They just released their brand new Advanced Azure Attacks course and the associated certification CARTE, the Certified Azure Red Team Expert. With this top-tier curriculum, you learn expert attack methodology, advanced tools and tradecraft for the Microsoft Identity Platform, OAuth, Microsoft Graph, and so much more. All with more than 16 hours of video material, slides, and practical lab exercises. After all, that's the best way to learn cybersecurity. Prove your merit and competency in a hands-on, application-based environment. If you're new to Azure Red Teaming, you can start your journey with the Basic Azure Attacks course and the associated certification, CARTP, the Certified Azure Red Team Professional. The course contains more than 14 hours of video content, learning materials, and a live lab in an Azure cloud environment. On top of that, a number of these trainings are also available as live online training boot camps. But celebrate April as the month of Azure security with my code Hammond20 for 20% off the on-demand versions of all 3 of their Azure courses. This includes the brand new Azure Red Team Expert course, and the code expires on April 30th, 2024 at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can get started learning and sharpening your security skills with my link below in the video description, jh.live/altered security. Huge thanks to Altered Security for sponsoring this video. Okay, so now that we know the subscription ID, we can actually capture that. Let's go copy and paste this value, set that as a variable up here, and we'll define that as just the subscription ID. Set that equal to the value that we've uncovered, and now we'll do a little bit more digging to see what resources are available with that subscription. So if I went to subscriptions, but this time I now included our subscription ID value and then asked for those resources, we could now take a look and see what might be available to us. So let me run this now one more time. I'll hit F5 to run the script and take a look. Oh, there's a lot here. So what I'm going to do is actually add a format list and then just a star to format all of that. I like to shorten that to FL as a quick alias, but it's fine as format list, really. Let's run that one more time and see what we have here. Whoa, take a look at all this stuff. The top one I think is a little bit interesting because you might be able to see, word wrap is kind of killing me here, but take a look. Microsoft Compute and then virtual machines and a name here, BKP AD Connect. And those are virtual machines. So we have a whole VM that we might be able to access. So let's see what permissions we might have access to in that resource group here. In fact, what I could do is honestly just take this big long ID value, kind of the URL that we might be able to access. Hey, taking off the subscription ID that we're working with as an environment variable, or at least set up as a variable in our script. And I can copy this and I realize, oh, there's a lot of noise because look, we're going to end up having some spaces in the mix. I will need to go cut that out at the very start as this word wraps in PowerShell. But if I were to go to those virtual machines, and then if I were to specify, look, I actually want some other providers in the mix, and I want to ask what my authorization permissions are. So Microsoft.authorization/permissions. Now, fingers crossed, if I hit F5 to run this, oh, okay, bloody error message, no registered resource found for API version 2020. Supported API versions for this are, oh, and I suppose we could just choose any of these, right? Here's 2015-0701. Let me copy this, and we'll use that for our API version. Now, let's F5 again. Will that work? Ooh, look at this. We have read actions. Okay, that's fine. And run command actions. All right. Now, again, hey, this is set up to showcase that taking advantage of some Azure misconfigurations or weaknesses there, where we could just execute whatever we want on those cloud virtual machines. Now that we know some of those finer details, we could try to actually get this Azure virtual machine and then run commands on it. So let's see how we might be able to do that. Let me try to get azvm, just in the interactive PowerShell down below. We'll specify the name of the virtual machine, which we know from our code is bkpad connect. That's fine. And then the resource group that this might be attached to or tied to. And again, we saw that even in the URL, that is just in engineering in this case. So let me see if that will return our virtual machine, since we might very well still be connected. In fact, actually, I don't think we are. We should go run this from our other interactive PowerShell command line because we haven't connected inside of ISC right now. So let me pivot back to PowerShell. And since we're connected, let's try to run this command. There we go. Take a look. Look at this. So we have all the details here, but there's some interesting stuff that might be present in the network profile section because we could drill down into the network interfaces. This is a cloud virtual machine after all, so it could just be out there on the open internet. Let's try to drill down into that. Now, can I run the same command, but this time pipe into maybe the select PowerShell commandlet, and I'll add the other switch here to expand property with a hyphen there, and I want to drill down into the network profile. Now, if I hit enter on this, we can pull that all down, and you know what? Hey, again, let's pipe to format list or FL star to get all the details here, and I might need to even, hey, drill down into the network interfaces. But since we have the full name here, BKP AD Connect and 368. That's another unique value here. We could actually go ask for get AZ network interface, and we'll include that name that we just retrieved. So I'll hit enter on this. What are the details that we get? Something cool? Ooh, there's a lot here. Okay, a lot to dig through, but if I scroll up, we might even be able to see some potential IP addresses. We can see all of the generic sort of details and metadata, and it won't tell us this right away, but we can see, look, there is another ID and even a whole resource that we could go access with the API again, but a public IP address defined with the name BKPAD Connect IP. So with that, hey, we could use a whole nother PowerShell commandlet, get AZ public IP address. I'll include the name here and paste in that value. And what do we get? Ooh, look at this. Okay, there's the IP address displayed right out for us, 20.52.148.232. Now we have a whole lot of opportunity. And again, this is a cloud virtual machine that we have a managed identity for, so we could do a little bit more damage since we can run commands and run code on that target. We could literally run arbitrary PowerShell. So what we might be able to do, since we have the public IP address, is actually add our own sort of backdoor account, add it into the administrators group, do whatever we need to, and potentially gain just control of the virtual machine. Now, we could get back to a text editor, whether it's Notepad or PowerShell ISE, and let's write out a whole script in PowerShell to do what we want to do, run those commands and add a backdoor user. So I hopped over back to ISE and I'll create a new script. I'll just save this on my desktop as like add user.ps1. And what I'll do is actually convert a plain text string. This can be our password. Oh, just fancy pass 123, I guess. We'll do that as plain text and we'll force that to make sure it happens. And we'll define that. We'll just store it as a variable password. I like to wrap these in parentheses so it's more clear that's the result of that commandlet. Now we can add a new local user. In this case, we'll supply the name. We can call this like backdoor, and then the password being our password variable that we just converted as a string we can use. And then we can add ourselves as a new local group member, with the group being the administrators and the member being our backdoor account. So that on its own should work well to give us, hey, at least a user that we could then interact with on that target virtual machine. We can just execute this as PowerShell on the VM through Azure. Actually, I'm sorry, that should be an add local group member. That could have been dangerous. That should be add local group member, and that explains why, maybe PowerShell, wasn't giving me the nice little IntelliSense autocomplete thing there. That should be add local group member with the group administrators and the member that we pass in. So let's try and do it. Let's get back to our PowerShell console where we do have an active Azure account connection. Let me clear the screen here and bear with me because there's a lot to type for this commandlet. Let's invoke Azure VM run command with the VM name being what we know, BKPAD connect. That is in the specific resource group, and we'll supply the name here as engineering. We saw that previously. We want the command ID to be the special sauce, run PowerShell script, and then we'll supply a script path variable, and that should be the actual location here that we want to supply our local script from. So my current user is student user 126, and on my desktop I have that adduser.ps1 file. Finally, I want that to be verbose, so I'll include that there as tac verbose, and fingers crossed, once I hit enter on this, it will perform that operation on that Azure virtual machine with everything that we figured out for the breadcrumbs and puzzle pieces here, and then it may very well just give us a whole new admin user on that box. Let's see, will this add our user and put him in the administrators group? Yes, it looks like it did it. Provisioning succeeded. We can see that it has output our backdoor user, and it has been created and added to the admin group. Now, since we have a local administrator account and we know the IP address of this cloud virtual machine just out there on the internet, we could literally connect to it and then control it and do whatever we want. Let's hop back to ISE just so we can grab this password line. So we'll stage that, set it up on our interactive command line here. I'll clear the screen so that's keeping cruising. With that password staged, let's go ahead and define a set of credentials. We'll use a new object, and I'm going to paste this in here because I always forget it. System.management.automation.ps credential with our username, and we know that was backdoor in this case, and that password that we've just got staged. Hit enter on that, and now we can define a whole session variable that is a new PowerShell session. We can specify the computer name being the actual IP address for that virtual machine out on the internet. I'll paste that in here. That was the 20.52.148.232. We'll supply our credential, which is just the creds object that we created just above. Let's see if this command works as it is. Can I see a new session created? Will that succeed? Will that error? I'm waiting for you, PowerShell. Okay. Seemingly okay. Now, can I enter that PS session, passing in our new session variable? Will that work? Oh my goodness. Oh, that's so cool. Take a look. We're added as the backdoor user. Obviously, checking a look at the host name here, we are in the BKP AD Connect cloud virtual machine. We're all in that Azure environment from the managed identity. Now, this is really cool. Now, something that we can think on is that, well, considering this is that cloud host set up and configured by someone, hey, some system administrator, we could maybe take a look through their tracks, what they did, and look at the history of the commands ran on that virtual machine. Since we are an admin on this box, we could go see what other users exist inside of the C:users directory. In this case, there are a whole lot of them. Hey, good folks learn and do a whole lot of Azure setup, but there is one that we're most interested in, that BKP AD Connect. We can drill down into that BKP AD Connect user because that's likely the one that set up this virtual machine. And actually, if we wanted to take a look at all their files, maybe tac force to look at all the sensitive or special system or hidden ones like app data, there might be some worthwhile and juicy info in there, like their roaming, Microsoft, Windows, PowerShell, and I'll clear the screen here to keep us cruising, make sure you can see that. They do have PS read line and their history file. Now, this is where we have some worthwhile details. Let's go ahead and cat that console history out. And look, we have a password variable defined where we're converting a secure string, just like we did previously, with the password creds to manage cloud sync. And that's pretty cool. Looks like that's for maybe an engineering administrator, so a worthwhile find there. Other internal IP addresses, and a lot of good stuff. And look, all of this came from just breaking a web app, hey, compromising with some remote code execution for an Azure website that has a managed identity behind it, bridging the gap in my mind between like what's endpoint security, traditional like, oh, PHP RCE to cloud security. In my mind, that is really, really cool. And look, I'll be the first to admit, I'm still learning a whole lot of this stuff. It's still new to me. I don't know much about Azure or cloud, but I love learning and getting to dig into this. And look, if you're super duper interested, this whole lab, this whole demonstration is from the Altered Security Beginner Azure Attacking and Defending course. You can check it out with the link below in the video description. And seriously, I'm a huge fan of all the stuff that they do. I can't sing their praises enough. This is how you can learn Azure Active Directory, pen testing, ethical hacking, and all that sweet stuff. Please do give them a look, and please do some of those YouTube algorithm things. If you like the video, then hey, press that like button, leave a comment, subscribe. I'm super duper grateful. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.